Imagine this. You're in your living room in the early 90s. Saturday night is on. The WCW logo flashes. And out walks a guy who looks like Little Richard crashed head first into a box of fireworks. Glitter cannon, feathered robe, bronze tan, and he's not just prancing, he's throwing legit drop kicks, flying over the top rope and stealing the show right under the noses of guys like Sting and Regal. Most people today remember Wildman Marc Mero from the WWF, if they remember him at all. But for a few wild years in WCW, he was something else. Johnny B.B. Bad, a flamboyant, controversial, Little Richard-inspired Hollywood knockoff that somehow worked, and worked beautifully. Stay with this video, because in the next 25 minutes, the Wrestleverse is going to take you back to that neon-soaked era and break down why this over-the-top gimmick not only got over, but captured the hearts of fans who grew up on both rock and roll and wrestling. Before we dive into the glitter and the TV title runs, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss any deep dive trips back into the wrestling verse you grew up with, especially if you remember when Saturday nights meant wrestling, not streaming. Setting the scene, WCW and the early 90s. To understand why Johnny B. Bad worked, you have to go back to early WCW, pre-NWO, still figuring out its identity, living in the shadow of the WWF cartoon era. WCW had serious wrestlers, but it also needed characters that could pop off the screen, especially on TBS, where casual viewers might stop mid-channel surfing. This was a company balancing work-rate guys trained in classic schools like the Malenkos in Florida with big, bold, TV-friendly gimmicks. Into that world walked Marc Mero, a former amateur boxer and enhancement talent, just looking for a way to stick around. The birth of Johnny B. Bad, Dusty's brainchild. The origin of Johnny B. Bad starts backstage, not in the ring. Marc Mero has told the story many times. Dusty Rhodes saw him doing jobs, took one look at his face and said, "Has anyone ever told you that you look like Little Richard?" And right there, a gimmick was born. Dusty didn't just slap a name on him. He coached the walk, the talk, the cadence, even the way he moved his hands and face. Mero studied Little Richard's mannerisms, but Dusty refined it, creating a wrestling character that was part rock icon, part Muhammad Ali, and part classic Southern heel. For an audience that grew up on Gorgeous George and later the superstar Billy Graham, this idea wasn't totally new, but it was cranked to 11 for the 1990s. The Little Richard tribute, why it felt right. Now, for fans over 45 today, Little Richard isn't just a name. He's the architect of rock and roll, the wild man behind songs that soundtrack your youth or your parents' youth. So when a guy comes out in WCW looking like him, sounding like him, that immediately taps into something familiar and nostalgic. Johnny B. Bad echoed Little Richard's flamboyance, the hair, the mustache, the bright makeup, the exaggerated facial expressions. But here's the key, it never felt like a cheap, mean-spirited parody, so much as a loving, campy tribute, especially once the act loosened up and Mero grew into it. Little Richard himself eventually heard about the gimmick and showed appreciation for it, which legitimized the tribute in the eyes of many fans. There were even Hollywood talks about a potential TV series with Little Richard as the father and Johnny B. Bad as the son, proof that this character jumped off the wrestling screen into pop culture possibilities. The presentation, entrances, outfits, and showmanship. What did you actually see when Johnny B. Bad walked down the aisle? You saw a presentation built for television. Bright, saturated gear, tassels, sequins, robes that would have made rock stars jealous, and that famous confetti bat blaster. He moved like a cross between a rock frontman and a cocky boxer, shuffling, showing off, preening, blowing kisses to the crowd, and talking about how pretty he was. For fans who grew up on the pageantry of 70s and 80s entertainment, this felt familiar, somewhere between a Vegas show and a wrestling match. In an era before HD, you had to be visually loud to stand out on a small TV in a living room. Johnny B. Bad didn't just stand out, he exploded off the screen. Beyond the gimmick, legit athletic credibility. All flash and no substance dies fast in wrestling. What made Johnny B. Bad work is that underneath the glitter, Marc Mero could go. Mero had a legit boxing background with Golden Gloves credentials before turning to wrestling, and he trained under the Malenko family, one of the most respected technical lineages in the business. That training translated into crisp drop kicks, solid timing, believable strikes, and enough conditioning to keep up in longer TV-style matches. He wasn't just a comedy gimmick. WCW trusted him enough to make him a 3-time world television champion, putting him in the ring with workers like Lord Steven Regal, Brian Pillman, Arn Anderson, and Honky Tonk Man. For fans at home, that sent a simple message. This guy might look outrageous, but he's for real. The heel that fans started to love. Johnny B. Bad actually started out as a heel. Over the top, obnoxious, almost daring crowds to boo the makeup, the attitude, the flamboyance. But wrestling history shows a pattern. When a character is this entertaining, sooner or later the boos turn into cheers. The same happened here. Fans began enjoying the promos, the lines, the theatrics, and eventually the athletic performances more than they hated the character. Older viewers recognized echoes of classic flamboyant heels from wrestling's past, which made it feel like a modern spin on something they'd seen as kids. That slow drift from love to hate that I love this guy, made his babyface turn feel natural. And once he was a fan favorite, WCW pushed him as a reliable staple of the TV title scene. The TV title era. Workhorse in glitter. The WCW World Television Championship was often the belt for the workhorse, the guy you could count on to deliver a strong match on free TV. Johnny B. Bad winning that title 3 times told viewers he was more than a costume. He was part of the company's backbone. His feuds with names like Lord Steven Regal, Honky Tonk Man, Arn Anderson, and Brian Pillman gave him the chance to show different sides of his skill set. Technical wrestling, brawling, and even boxer versus wrestler storytelling. For older fans who valued in-ring ability as much as characters, this helped the gimmick pass the test. When WCW trusted Johnny B. Bad to open shows, defend titles on major cards, and carry segments, it showed they understood his unique mix of eye-catching presentation and dependable ring work. A character ahead of his time. Many analysts today argue that Johnny B. Bad was ahead of his time. A flamboyant, ambiguous, high-energy babyface who blended music, culture, camp, and athleticism would probably fit perfectly in modern wrestling. In the early 90s, though, some viewers weren't sure what to make of a white Jewish wrestler in heavy tan and makeup doing a Little Richard homage on Southern TV. Yet for many fans, especially those who grew up with that era of music and weren't put off by the presentation, the character came across as refreshing, something different from the standard tough guy mold. Looking back now, the Johnny B. Bad character feels like a prototype for future flamboyant stars who used color, emotion, and showmanship as much as power moves to get over. Hollywood knockoff or heartfelt tribute. The theme of this video is Hollywood knockoffs, so where does Johnny B. Bad land on that spectrum? On paper, it's the definition of a knockoff, a wrestling version of a famous musician, built around his look, vibe, and attitude. But what saved it from feeling cheap was sincerity. Dusty Rhodes loved big characters, and Marc Mero leaned into the role with genuine enthusiasm. He studied, refined, and embraced the mannerisms rather than just mocking them. When Little Richard himself responded positively, that turned the whole thing into more of an authorized homage in the minds of many fans. So why did it work so well? Because it took the familiar, rock and roll's wildest frontman, and blended it with the familiar language of wrestling, the cocky heel, the underdog babyface, the workhorse champion. Fans didn't have to learn a new character from scratch. They just had to imagine, what if Little Richard laced up boots and stepped between the ropes? The transition to WWF and loss of the gimmick. When Marc Mero left WCW in 1996 and signed with the WWF, he couldn't bring Johnny B. Bad. WCW owned the name and character. So, he became Wildman Marc Mero, a more grounded babyface managed by Sable, and even captured the Intercontinental Championship. For fans who grew up with the WCW version, it always felt like something was missing. The moves were there, the effort was there, but the magic of that Little Richard-style electricity was gone. You can change the gear and the name, but you can't always replace a character that perfectly clicked with a specific moment in time. To a lot of older viewers, this is why the Johnny B. Bad run has such a cult following today. It was a lightning-in-a-bottle blend of the right performer, the right booker, the right era, and the right tribute. Legacy and what might have been. Eric Bischoff and others have said Johnny B. Bad was never truly seen as a world title guy, despite holding the TV belt multiple times. In an era of giants and larger-than-life main eventers, a glittery rock and roll homage had a ceiling in WCW's hierarchy. But legacy isn't just about belts. When fans look back at early 1990s WCW highlight reels, Johnny B. Bad is one of the first visual memories. The confetti, the colors, the hair, the strut. For viewers now over 45, he represents a very specific feeling. Coming home, flipping on TBS, and seeing something that felt at once ridiculous and strangely irresistible. Even outside the ring, Marc Mero went on to a second act as a motivational speaker, talking candidly about his struggles with drugs and the pressures of the business, which only deepens fans' respect when they revisit his Johnny B. Bad days. Why it still connects with older fans. So why does Johnny B. Bad still resonate so strongly with fans over 45? Because the character sits at a crossroads of memories. Childhood or teenage memories of rock and roll and Little Richard. Saturday nights spent watching WCW. The transition from old-school territories to national TV wrestling. He reminds fans of a time when wrestling wasn't ashamed to be colorful, loud, and a little absurd, yet still committed to giving you a good, solid match once the bell rang. In a way, Johnny B. Bad is a symbol of that fragile balance between cartoon character and credible wrestler that defined so much of 80s and early 1990s wrestling. For many, seeing a clip of him today is like hearing an old song come on the radio,
Maybe you chuckle at it, maybe you roll your eyes a little, but you don't change the station.
If you were there, you remember the sound of the crowd, the colors on your old television, the feeling that wrestling could try absolutely anything and somehow make it work. Johnny B. Bad was one of those experiments that shouldn't have clicked, but did, because behind the glitter was a hard-working pro paying tribute to an icon of your generation. This wasn't just a Hollywood knockoff. It was rock and roll stepping into a wrestling ring, winking at you through the camera and inviting you to boo, cheer, or just enjoy the ride. If this episode brought back memories of staying up late for WCW Saturday night, arguing about gimmicks with your buddies, or hearing Little Richard blasting from a jukebox or car radio, you're exactly who this channel is for. Take a second right now to hit subscribe and join the Wessleverse, where wrestling history isn't just recapped, it's remembered the way you lived it. Drop a comment with your favorite Johnny B. Bad moment or the first time you saw him on TV and what you thought back then. And if there's another Hollywood knockoff gimmick you want to revisit, maybe one you loved or one you hated, tell the Wessleverse below, because your memories are what keep this universe spinning. Until next time, this is the Wessleverse, signing off. Keep your feet on the ground, your eyes on the ring, and your heart in the era that made you fall in love with wrestling in the first place.